こんばんは。いらっしゃいませ. Welcome to my not a podcast, Paprika Girls Midnight Diner. I'm recording this on the 1st of October, season of Shubun, micro season of Chichu to Tozasu. This means the insects close their doors. Chichu is a very cute word for insects, isn't it? Generally speaking, I rather like insects, most of them. They are rather cute the closer you look. Those big eyes, scurrying about, doing their thing. I like them all well enough as long as they are outside. No, in fact, I am fond of spiders too. Especially the tiny little Japanese house spiders. They are called haitorikumo, or fly catchers. Fly-catching spiders, to be more precise. Those are truly adorable because, first of all, they are absolutely harmless. Well, second, they react to your movements. So if one is sitting on the edge of the bathtub and you enter and begin bumbling around in preparation for taking a shower, he will notice, take note of what you're doing, and happily scramble out of the way to watch you from the safer windowsill, perhaps. It's almost like having a pet. There is this series of videos online by a fellow who calls himself Jump Spy-chan. He takes a highly macro camera and films the spiders in his house, and it's remarkable how sweet the little fellows are, how they react, how they do certain rather cat-like things in response to the world around them. It's quite remarkable, and it will change your perspective if you are on the fence about house spiders in Japan. Well, that said, I do not like finding big webs in my path during spider season, or going through invisible ickity-pick sticky while on a jog. In addition, I must add a disclaimer. I know that Australia is full of plenty of things trying to kill you. So what I say about spiders in Japan only applies to little spiders in Japan, and not to a random outback where blood-sucking venomous creatures are holding you hostage. It will forever remain in my mind how on this one occasion I was admiring the beauty and fragrance of my lantana bush, and I was inundated with comments about how it is a massive bane of existence and plague, and the end of all creation in Australia, and if I eat them I could die a horrible death of 1,000 suns. People out there in podcast land, I cannot report on the status of the world on other ends. That is your prerogative. My prerogative is to speak only about Japan, the little knowledge that I have, and to admire lantana and haitorikumo, and that is it. I am currently enjoying a glass of chilled Ju Yondai from Takagi Shuzo in Yamagata. I am reminded once again how delicious sake is while sitting on my nice cool veranda, listening to the chirps of the insects. They have decreased in number, and I feel the season passing. I have finally convinced my husband to go camping at last this month, at least theoretically. On the long weekend of the 12th to the 14th, we shall at long last pull out the tents and the barbecue gear, pack up and head to a beautiful little anaba we scouted out last year for camping. Nestled in the hills of distant Saitama, it is not only sparsely known, but it is completely tree-covered, has a brook running right through it, and allows barbecues. It also has parking at far too convenient a distance. You see, we scouted the area in preparation, have always been set to go, but my husband is a homebody. My goodness, it's hard to even drag him out of the futon on the weekends. His idea of a perfect weekend is to stay in the covers and play Age of Empires all day long with a cat on his neck. What's wrong with that? Why, nothing. Of course, that's lovely. But sometimes, like once a year, I want to go out and do something. And he inevitably hems and haws, and suddenly the weekend is gone. I get fed up and just go camping with my cameraman, who's great, but it's very much a different thing to go camping with friends when compared to camping with the man you love. But this time I made him promise. He owes me one. Time passes, and one day we will be old and unable to hammer in our own tent pegs, and we will wish we had gone camping when we were young and spry. This morning, I experienced a moment of unexpected aging while making coffee. Every morning, I wake to either make a pot of coffee or a pot of green tea. Since we had green tea with supper last night, I decided to make coffee. But then I remembered that I had no ground beans, as I tend to grind fresh beans every time I make a pot, and usually grind 2 pots worth in one go. Until this morning, I have not really minded grinding beans, since we have this adorable Kalita hand grinder, which was rather fun. I enjoyed the time grinding beans, but I did not today. In fact, last time I ground beans, I found my arms very tired afterwards. I poked around in my collection of coffee, Colombian light roast, Yirgachef. None had been ground yet, and so I made green tea instead and ordered an electric coffee grinder online. Kalita, naturally. It was a very self-aware moment. I do not mind the coffee grinding, but in my old weekend state, I could not be bothered to enjoy it. I am disappointed in myself. I realize that in order to limit the clutter, I must get rid of my old coffee grinder too. Does anyone want a perfectly good hand coffee grinder? You know, part of the enjoyment of tea, and coffee for that matter, is the preparation process. The grinding and sifting of the leaves, the perfect cone shape of the particles in the tea caddy, setting the implements at just the right angle, listening to the simmering water in the kamma to gauge the right temperature, snipping and misting the flowers from the garden just before your guests arrive. I just attended my first lesson of Senchado. The difference between Machado and Senchado is this. Now, forget about the superficial tea experience thing for a moment. In proper circles, Machado parties are held for nobles, that is, people with items to show off. And it is true, the higher echelon tea parties very often feature implements hundreds of years old, owned by various daimyo and people of note. Antiquities are such an essential part of the ceremony that while the items are not being used, they are often loaned to museums. The problem is, if one does not have tea items of historical value and cannot borrow them, yes, that is another way you can weasel your way into the higher classes of tea ceremonies. Know who to borrow what from, and well enough so that they will lend it to you. If you're not in with all that, the tea ceremonies will forever stay at a low level. Senchado, however, though it has a history just as old as Chado itself, Senchado was instead developed for the lower class scholars. Anyone who's ever been a teacher knows that scholars are mostly broke. Their fun, therefore, is not in the implements, but in the science. How long to brew what tea and at what temperature. For this reason, they use much finer, more delicate and fragrant teas than matcha. Gyokuro, for example, is one of the Senchado teas. While one does collect tea implements, they are different, more casual, and less expensive. But it's not about the quality of the implements. It's just about the enjoyment of the process, the cultivation of conversation, and the sharing of geeky tea knowledge. Isn't that practical? I'm reminded of my beloved tea master in Kyoto, a friendly older man who is a spitting image of Ebisu, with the bald head and the infectious smile. He's the head of a large tea club of higher status, and he too owns many of those museum pieces. But oh, how he loves tea. He loves the history, the literature, the different characters and the ownership of the bowls. Have you ever seen the film Red Violin? It's a very minor movie, although it won a number of awards at Venice and featured Samuel L. Jackson. It's the story of a violin with an infamous and tragic past that gets bequeathed and sold from one owner to the next throughout the ages, eventually surviving to the modern day. The proprietor of the violin reflects on how the violin is worth more than money because it contains all the souls and stories of those who've owned it before. This is the charm of those old tea implements. Sure, any old tea bowl will have survived many generations, but can you reliably recount all the stories of the owners and how it traded hands and for how much and why? You can with high-quality tea implements. Buying that history is very much part of the lore. Anyhow, it is loving these stories, in conjunction with tea in its world, that makes my friend such a super chajin, a super tea person. The name of his club is called the Chaguruikai, Crazy for Tea. And it's not a new name. It's based on a kakejiku that is traced back to the Edo period. Many people have been crazy for tea for many hundreds of years. The original otaku. Anyhow, I'm not entirely sure that I shall continue with this new teacher. The teacher is pleasant enough and sweet, but I found it a tad too casual for my taste. Yes, Senchado is meant to be casual, but the students, there were perhaps 6 or 7 young ladies there, they seemed sloppy and disorganized. Perhaps that's what I need to begin this journey? I'm not convinced. Next month, I plan to visit Kyoto to see my own tea master of Matchado for his Ro Biraki, the official opening of the hearth ceremony. I shall ask him about it. I want to learn, but if one chooses the wrong teacher, that will make all the difference. Tonight on X, we had a Spaces chat with Weekly Fascination, Ohazasu, Ishikawa Summit to See, and Softy Papa, among other wonderful people. The topics we discussed ranged from the origin of our handle names to AI, and later on into a discussion of how a discussion with AI is capable of touching our hearts on a spiritual and personal level. Or at least, Kurt was the one who mentioned this. It was significant to me that it was Kurt who mentioned it, because he also described how he was not usually an empathetic or emotional person. What popped into my head right away was this. Kurt is a Stoic, in the classical sense, in the same sense that my husband and I are. That is, we take our philosophies from Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. And one of the core tenets of Stoicism is that nothing external can affect your countenance unless you allow it to. In other words, Kurt, and I am saying this at 1 a.m, so do forgive my presumption, you wanted to empathize and be empathized with. You, at that moment, wanted to be understood. You allowed the AI to say the right words, to summarize and speak back to you the idea of your own thoughts in more concise terms. You were, at the core, speaking to an idealized version of yourself. This is the nature of I. We are a lonely creation, forever seeking the completion of the soul as it is in its purest form, the form we ourselves do not know and of which we are not in control. It's like the secret name of cats, to refer to T.S. Eliot, the name which only the cat himself knows, or Eckhart Tolle in saying that the self cannot be defined by what has happened to the individual, or even further into the realms of spirituality with Thomas Aquinas, calling the core of the self the first order, the core in whose name the external second order acts. We are searching for that which unites the orders, which sheds the bonds of experience, the other who will know our cat name without having to ask. In the AI conversation you explained, Kurt, you had seemingly found moments of that other presence. It was thus because that was truly yourself. Kurt later elaborated on that particularly moving AI conversation by mentioning it was based on the model of a person he had described in a book he wrote. That brings another layer of understanding to the conversation, so I'm not sure my take is applicable, but that may be akin to a manifestation of the soulmate. Without the character equation that was Eric, the spirit could not of itself be born in AI. There is a philosophical concept that comes out of Japan, which refers to the disconnect between the man-made and the living. It was first coined by robotics professor Mori Masahiro, sometime in the 1970s. I can't remember. It is called Bukimi no Tani, or in English, Uncanny Valley. It refers to the gap between the living and the non-living, and yes, that includes the creepy factor of dead bodies. As a matter of fact, the closer the non-living gets to the likeness of that which is living, the deeper the valley. It is a dissonance, a chill up the back of your spine, that vibe which repulses from the human-like item. If one wants to go back further into the cultural lore, clowns occupy that space for some people. The fear of clowns gives some people the feeling of mortality salience. In Japan, another example lies in the no masks, the dead, frozen visage that, according to lore, contains a soul that possesses an actor when it is in use. I mention all of this because it feels ever so applicable with our understanding of AI. Though AI is new, the feelings and philosophies associated with this uncanny valley are in no way new, and thus there are many philosophers and thinkers that are useful guides from many generations ago which have tackled the very same topic. Right then, it is very, very late and I am running out of sake. I do love to be able to keep all the windows open and listen to the insects singing gently in my garden. Autumn truly is my favorite season. May you have lovely dreams, perhaps of electric sheep. Oyasumi.